That particular morning, I was enjoying my front porch, quietly sipping a refreshing beer, a simple pleasure for a retired construction worker with a lingering back injury. Suddenly, two uniformed officers appeared, striding up my driveway as if responding to a high-stakes hostage situation. Their flashlights were on, hands hovered near their belts, and their expressions were intensely serious, as though they'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. One of them announced, "Sir, please step away from the property. You are currently on HOA land." I paused, glancing down at my work boots, which were resting on the very porch I had constructed myself. Looking back up at them, I replied, "Well, gentlemen, if this isn't my property, who has been faithfully covering the mortgage payments?" Before they could process the sheer absurdity of their statement, Karen, the HOA president, emerged from behind them, power-walking with an air of importance, much like a well-dressed raccoon. Her finger jabbed the air, aggressively pointing. "Arrest him," she commanded. "He no longer owns this land." I was unsure whether to erupt in laughter, choke on my drink, or inquire if she had accidentally inhaled fertilizer. But then, a profound and chilling realization washed over me, settling deep within my chest. They weren't merely enforcing regulations, they were attempting to seize my land, inch by painstaking inch. With a deliberate slowness, I stood up, brushed the dust from my jeans, and fixed my gaze on the badge of the nearest officer. Without raising my voice or resorting to theatrics, I delivered a single, unequivocal statement. "You gentlemen are about to discover you've chosen the wrong man's porch to stand upon." That very moment marked the genesis of this entire convoluted predicament, and if you have a spare moment, I can explain precisely how it all unfolded. A modest porch, a path leading to the lake, and a single crimson metal sign transformed my tranquil existence into the most absurd legal battle I've faced since my divorce. Following the officer's somewhat sheepish retreat that morning, I returned to my porch swing, observing the expanse of land before me. A gentle breeze carrying the familiar scent of pine and lake water rustled through the trees, a sensation that had been the primary reason for my purchase of this property in the first place. After 54 years on this earth, I was utterly weary, not just in need of a nap, but profoundly tired of witnessing too much, experiencing too much, and losing too much. My marriage had dissolved 3 years prior, an event that was legally clean but emotionally devastating, leaving me with a diminished bank account and an echoing emptiness. My two sons, grown and independent, resided in different states, actively engaged in their own lives precisely as I had intended for them. However, this left me with an abundance of solitary evenings, and after nearly 3 decades of hands-on construction work, the kind that builds things, not just oversees them, retirement brought little more than scars, a creaky knee, and calluses that persisted long after my work boots were retired. Thus, when I discovered this parcel of land, 4 acres nestled behind a stand of venerable oaks that creaked in the wind yet stood with unwavering dignity, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the quiet of isolation, but the profound stillness of contentment. A narrow stream meandered along the southern edge of my property, its course discernible as it disappeared behind a clump of maple trees. When the wind was right, I could detect the lake's presence before I ever laid eyes on it. In the evenings, as I sat outdoors with a chilled beer, the sky would transform into that exquisite golden hue characteristic of late summer, as if the world itself was urging a slower pace. I erected my house entirely by myself, eschewing contractors and crews, relying solely on my own tools and the residual strength of my back, which my profession hadn't entirely depleted. The porch was my favorite feature, broad, robust, and spacious enough to accommodate a hammock strung between 2 maple trees to which I had grown quite fond. I applied 3 coats of stain to the wood within the first month, not out of necessity, but out of a deep desire for every element of this place to be unequivocally mine, my effort invested in every nail, my sweat infused into every plank, and for a considerable period it was idyllic. Neighbors from neighboring properties would offer a friendly wave as they passed, and townsfolk would stop to compliment the appearance of my home. I would awaken with the sun's rays filtering through the blinds, step outside barefoot onto the warm wooden boards, and feel as though I had finally escaped the clamor of the world. However, tranquility is a delicate thing. It doesn't vanish abruptly. Instead, it erodes gradually, silently, much like water gradually wears away stone. And the initial fissure in my serenity appeared in the form of a pathway. It was a simple, unadorned dirt trail that traversed the rear of my property, leading directly towards the lake. Initially, I paid it little mind. People used it for walks, children on bicycles, and dog owners on their morning excursions. I reasoned, what's the harm? Summer is brief. Let them enjoy the shortcut. I don't mind. But as I sat on that porch swing, reflecting on the recent confrontation, I recognized a truth that should have been apparent much earlier. The moment you permit others to treat your land as their own, it's only a matter of time before someone concludes that you no longer have a rightful place there. And believe me, their actions were just the beginning. That trail behind my property had always seen a fair amount of use, but the summer amplified the noise. More footsteps, more bicycles, more commotion, and with this increased activity came an unwelcome consequence: litter. Initially, it was a single soda can, then two, followed by a collection of wrappers and plastic cups strewn carelessly across the brush line. I attempted to rationalize it. People are forgetful. Children can be careless. But the moment I discovered a used diaper partially buried beneath one of my maple trees, my patience evaporated. I had spent 30 years in construction, encountering situations most people couldn't even comprehend. Yet nothing could have prepared me for the sheer audacity of finding a stranger's discarded diaper on my own soil. Donning gloves, I cleaned it up, muttering under my breath, and resumed my day. However, trouble often arrives in groups. A couple of afternoons later, I heard boisterous laughter emanating from the trail, the kind of sound that signals impending trouble even before you see its source. As I drew nearer, I observed 3 teenage boys, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, tossing empty beer cans into my woods as if they were participating in a baseball game. I approached them calmly, hands in my pockets, my voice steady. "All right, boys, pick all that up. You're on private property." The tallest of the group, with shaggy blonde hair and expensive sneakers, didn't even attempt to conceal the can in his hand. He smirked as if he owned the place. "Relax, old man," he quipped. "Everyone uses this trail." "This trail is on my land," I countered, "and you're littering on it." Another boy snorted. "Whatever, it's just trash." I took a step closer, not in a threatening manner, but without yielding ground. "Trash becomes vandalism when it's on private property," I stated. "Would you prefer I file the report with the sheriff right now, or would you rather pick it up?" They froze. Not out of fear, but out of offense. Teenagers like them rarely experience immediate fear. They are typically offended. The blond boy narrowed his eyes. "Are you serious?" "Deadly serious," I confirmed. His companion muttered, "Dude, chill. My mom will freak if she gets that call again." I caught that crucial word, mom. The blond boy turned back to me, his lips twitching, incredulous that anyone would dare challenge him. "My mom runs the HOA, he declared, enunciating each word as if it were a badge of honor. "So, we're allowed to be here?" I exhaled sharply, a sound that wasn't quite a laugh or a sigh, but rather the audible acknowledgement of precisely the kind of trouble I was facing. "No, son," I said calmly. "You're allowed here only if I permit it." I gestured towards the discarded cans. "Pick them up." For a moment, we stood in silent opposition, ingrained stubbornness against youthful arrogance. Finally, one of them bent down and retrieved a can. The others, grumbling, followed suit. They offered no apology, no acknowledgement, no sign of remorse. Good. I wasn't seeking apologies. As they departed, the blond boy tossed a parting remark over his shoulder. "We'll see about this." Those 4 simple words felt like an ominous storm cloud gathering on the horizon. By sunset, I had tidied my porch, opened a fresh beer, and had nearly put the incident out of my mind. That is, until a forceful, sharp, angry pounding erupted at my door. Upon opening it, I was confronted by Karen, her ponytail identical to the blonde boy's, her sneer the same, and the same air of proprietorship in her eyes. Her opening words were not a question, but an outright accusation. "Did you threaten my sons?" In that instant everything became clear. The litter, the defiant attitude, the sense of entitlement. I understood then that the boys were not the problem. They were merely the prelude. I stood in my doorway, beer still in hand, and faced the woman who had just accused me of threatening her children. One of her feet rested on my welcome mat as if she were claiming the very land for Spain. Her ponytail mirrored her son's. Her form-fitting workout attire likely cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her expression was typical of those who believe rules apply to everyone but themselves. Before I could utter a word, she jabbed a finger towards my chest. "You stay away from my sons. Do you understand me?" I took a slow breath, counted to 3, and reminded myself that I was too old to slam a door in someone's face. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "your boys were discarding trash throughout my woods. They informed me you threatened to press charges." "I told them I could," she snapped. "Trespassing and littering on private property," I corrected her. "That's the law." She scoffed, an exaggerated, dramatic sound as if performing for an invisible audience. "Private property?" she repeated incredulously. "This trail has been utilized by this community for 20 years. It's practically public access." I crossed my arms. "Practically, ma'am," I replied, "is not legally." That statement clearly struck a nerve. Her eyes sharpened, as if she had discovered the single loose thread on a sweater she intended to unravel entirely. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "My community has rights. People don't require your permission to traverse areas they've always used." "On my deeded property?" I inquired. "Yes, they do." She moved even closer, close enough that I could detect the cloying scent of her expensive perfume mingling with the faint odor of perspiration from whatever strenuous activity she had recently engaged in. "Do you imagine you can simply move in here," she hissed, "and start dictating rules and bullying teenagers?" That remark elicited a short, weary, disappointed laugh from me. "Lady," I said, "if reminding children not to pollute the woods constitutes bullying, you have far more significant issues at home than me." Her lips tightened, her jaw clenched, and for a fleeting moment I thought she might attempt to strike me. Instead, she turned towards the trail, gesturing dramatically as if on a low-budget courtroom television drama. "This trail," she declared, "belongs to Lakeview Estates, and you will not impede access." "It's on my land," I reiterated, enunciating each word with deliberate clarity. "That means I dictate what transpires on it." She shook her head, a smirk suggesting she possessed some secret knowledge I lacked. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ah, there it was. The quintessential HOA battle cry. Every tyrannical HOA representative across America utters that exact phrase at least once a week alongside, "We sent you a notice," and violation number 3. I leaned against the doorframe, taking another sip of my beer. "Ma'am, I'm far too old for threats. Please state your business." She squared her shoulders. "If you ever address my children again, I will file harassment charges, and I will ensure the HOA deals with you." I raised an eyebrow. "Deals with me how?" She offered no response, nor did she need to. Turning abruptly, she marched back down my driveway, tossing a parting salvo over her shoulder. "Enjoy your peace while you have it." I watched her disappear into the gathering dusk, the end of her ponytail bouncing with what seemed like indignation. For a prolonged moment, the night remained still, quiet, almost ordinary. Yet, within my chest, a subtle disquiet had begun to stir. Karen hadn't appeared because of her sons. Her sons had appeared because of Karen, and I was only beginning to comprehend the magnitude of the storm I had inadvertently entered. Following Karen's rather theatrical display at my doorstep, the evening settled back into its familiar tranquility, the chirping of crickets, the gentle rustling of leaves, the low hum of the surrounding woods. For a brief period, I even managed to convince myself that the entire ordeal was concluded. However, peace doesn't typically end with fanfare. It dissolves through subtle encroachments, minor transgressions, small indicators that only become apparent when one is paying close attention. The first indication arrived the following morning. I stepped onto my porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, ready to commence the day as I always did, unhurried, quiet, and with gratitude. From my vantage point, I could observe the entrance to the trail through the trees, and there, directly beneath my modest, handcrafted, private property, "Please don't litter" sign, sat a half-crushed beer can. It wasn't discarded haphazardly, nor had it been blown there by the wind. It was placed with deliberate precision, a clear challenge or message. I stared at it for a considerable time, a cold unease flickering in my stomach. I retrieved it, tossed it into my trash bin, and cautioned myself against jumping to conclusions. Perhaps a late-night passerby had been careless. Perhaps it was mere coincidence, except coincidence rarely strikes twice in succession. The subsequent morning, 3 cans were arranged in a neat line directly in front of the sign, as if someone had taken the time to meticulously position them. And on the third morning, wrappers, plastic cups, cigarette butts, and a shattered glass bottle lay scattered like festive confetti. Yet every single item was contained within a 3-foot radius of my sign, not on the trail, not further down the path, but precisely there, directly in front of the sole marker I had erected to establish a boundary. I bent down, picking up each piece individually, the way a man does when he isn't yet angry, but knows the anger is inevitable. As I cleaned, I noticed footprints. Smaller ones, clearly belonging to teenagers, some with the distinctive, ostentatiously designed soles favored by the affluent children of the HOA, and one larger, wider footprint indicative of an adult. While I hesitated to make assumptions, I could easily envision Karen standing just beyond the trees, arms crossed, barking orders like a military commander. I disposed of the accumulated trash, washed my hands, and cast a long gaze down the path that disappeared into the woods. My sign had proven ineffective. My patience had waned, and my politeness had certainly failed. It was then that a crucial realization dawned upon me. This wasn't about the trail, or access to the lake, or even about teenagers behaving foolishly. It was about individuals who believed the world rightfully belonged to them simply because they declared it so. Individuals who viewed boundaries as mere suggestions, who perceived other people's property as an extension of their own, people who had never been told no without facing consequences, the very type who raise sons who boast about their mother's authority within the HOA. Standing there, trash bag in hand, I felt a profound shift within my chest. A slow, deep anger began to simmer, an anger that doesn't erupt but rather settles. For I now understood precisely what this was. Not simply littering, but a deliberate warning shot. That evening, I opted not to enjoy my beer on the porch. Instead, I proceeded to the shed, retrieved a new metal sign, sturdier this time, and a bag of concrete mix. If courtesy had failed, authority would be employed. If politeness had been ignored, clarity would be established. If "please don't" was disregarded, "no trespassing." "Violators will be prosecuted" would convey the message. As the sun began its descent behind the trees, casting a golden and orange hue across the landscape, I carried the new sign to the trailhead, much like a man bearing the last vestiges of his patience. The air was growing cooler, the sun dipping below the tree line, bathing the woods in that warm orange glow that makes one wish for a world devoid of conflict. But conflict exists, especially when it shares a zip code with an HOA. I positioned the sign first, bold red lettering, prominent enough for even the visually impaired to discern: "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." No more polite requests. No more implied suggestions. No more hopeful anticipation of mutual respect for my property. I drove the metal post into the earth with a heavy hammer, each resounding strike echoing through the trees like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. Then I mixed the concrete in a bucket, a thick gray slurry, and poured it around the base, compacting it firmly with a shovel to ensure that neither a teenager nor an adult could dislodge it without the assistance of a truck and a tow strap. It was a task I had performed countless times during my construction career, but this time it felt intensely personal. By the time I had finished, the sky had transitioned through shades of purple and blue. The crickets had commenced their nightly serenade, and I stood there, gazing at the sign, experiencing a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. On my return journey along the path, I encountered one of my neighbors, old Jim Walker. He resided 2 properties over, a retired mechanic, the kind of fellow who perpetually wore the same faded cap that proclaimed, "Farmers feed America," despite having sold his tractor a decade prior. He leaned over his fence, casually chewing on sunflower seeds. "Heard you doing some hammering back there," he remarked. "Just putting up a sign," I replied. Jim spat a seed husk onto the ground. "Had enough of people treating my place like a refuse receptacle." He let out a slow whistle. "Son, you realize who you're provoking, don't you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Teenagers." Jim shook his head. "No, their mother." "Which one?" I inquired. "The one who runs the darn HOA." "Ah, Karen, naturally." Jim rubbed the back of his neck as if contemplating the extent of his candor. "Look, Ron, I'm not telling you what to do, but that woman, she doesn't take kindly to being told no, and she certainly doesn't like losing control." "Her control ends at her property line," I stated. Jim snorted. "You think she respects property lines?" I offered no reply, as that observation struck a little too close to the truth. Jim pushed himself away from the fence and brushed off his jeans. "Just be prepared. People like her don't back down. They intensify." With that ominous warning hanging in the air like a brewing storm, he retreated towards his shed. I continued the remaining distance to my house, the night settling heavily around me. I could still discern the new sign at the edge of the woods, catching the last remnants of daylight like a small silver shield. I felt a sense of pride in it. It was resolute. It was unambiguous. It was fair. And above all, it was mine. Yet even as I stood on my porch, the woods alive with unseen activity in the darkness, Jim's words lingered. They don't back down. They double down. Little did I know, that sign, the one I had meticulously set in concrete, would not endure 48 hours, and the individuals who came for it were not arriving with politeness, nor with a spirit of community, nor even with a shred of shame. They were arriving armed with a crowbar and the smug assurance of those who believed that rules were irrelevant to them, particularly those adorned with polo shirts bearing an HOA logo. The morning after I firmly planted that new sign in concrete, the world felt almost normal again. Birds were chirping, the sun was cresting the tree line, and the comforting aroma of coffee filled my kitchen. For a few blissful minutes I allowed myself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the message had been received and understood. Then I opened my mailbox. Inside lay an envelope so aggressively official in appearance it seemed to hiss at me. Thick, crisp white paper adorned with HOA letterhead, sealed with navy blue ink as if it were a congressional decree. I stood there for a moment, a knot tightening in my stomach. Lakeview Estates, Homeowners Association, Enforcement and Compliance Division. Compliance Division. Good heavens. I tore it open. The document within comprised 3 pages, printed front and back, written in that cold corporate tone that HOA boards seem to master, a tone that sounds polite yet feels like a deliberate insult. It began thus. "Mr. Hunt, it has come to our attention that you have unlawfully obstructed a community access path that has served the residents of Lakeview Estates for over 20 years. Your actions constitute grounds for violation, penalties, and legal review." I blinked at the words, unable to reconcile the notion of an unlawful obstruction on my own land. I continued reading. "Effective immediately, you are hereby ordered to remove the unauthorized signage impeding the trail. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in a formal notice. Continued obstruction may prompt legal proceedings on behalf of the community. It certainly did improve. Furthermore, you are reminded that the harassment of minors is a grave infraction. We anticipate your complete cooperation in preventing future occurrences." I had to take a moment for that one. I literally fetched a folding chair and set it up right next to the mailbox because my mind simply refused to process the sheer lack of intellect presented on that document, harassing minors for instructing them to cease launching beer cans onto my property. The third page was the one that made my eye involuntarily twitch. Our records confirmed the existence of a long-standing access right in the vicinity in question. Lakeview Estates has enjoyed continuous use of this path for upwards of 2 decades. Consequently, your attempt to restrict access is legally invalid. A historic easement, uninterrupted use, unlawful. I couldn't help myself. I began to chuckle. It wasn't a hearty laugh. It was the kind of chuckle a weary older gentleman might emit upon realizing he's perusing something so detached from reality that it loops back around into sheer absurdity. If I had a nickel for every time an overzealous homeowners association asserted ownership of something based on historical claim, I could have purchased the entire neighborhood and disbanded it myself. I refolded the correspondence, returned to the house, and placed it on the kitchen counter as if it were evidence in a criminal investigation. And that's precisely when my phone vibrated. It was a message from an unfamiliar sender. We observed the sign you erected. That is not permissible. Remove it before the situation deteriorates further. No name, no salutation, just arrogance disguised as a threat. I responded with a single sentence. Identify yourself. There was no reply. I stood there, fixated on my phone, the letter, and the dense woods visible through my window. The message could have originated from anyone. A committee member, a neighbor, Karen herself, or some aspiring HOA enthusiast seeking to gain favor. I set my phone down and exhaled slowly. This was no longer about the sign. It wasn't about the pathway. It wasn't even about those youngsters. This was a conflict for dominance, their dominance over land that did not belong to them. Over an individual they presumed they could intimidate. And with every veiled threat, every official notice, every fabricated violation, I felt a deep-seated resolve solidify within me, surpassing mere anger. Determination. I gazed out at the trees and murmured to myself, if they desire a confrontation, they are about to witness a genuine one. However, I had no inkling then of the extent of the ensuing chaos. I was unaware that Karen had devised her own strategies for escalation, and I certainly did not anticipate that 2 law enforcement officers would be at my doorstep sooner than I imagined. 2 days subsequent to the arrival of the HOA notification, I was on my porch making a minor adjustment to a loose hinge when I heard the sound of tires moving deliberately over the gravel. Not at speed, not urgently, but slowly. The kind of deliberate pace that indicates the approaching party is not lost. I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked up. A patrol vehicle entered my driveway, and my stomach gave a slight lurch. Not from apprehension, but from a premonition I've learned to trust over the years. This encounter was unlikely to be amicable. 2 officers alighted from the vehicle. The first, a younger gentleman, likely in his early 30s, appeared uneasy, not frightened, but discomfited, as if he would have preferred to be anywhere else. The second, adorned with a prominent gray mustache, bore a perpetual frown etched onto his features like an ominous warning. His hands rested on his belt as though he had been anticipating this very moment all morning, solely to admonish someone. I had encountered his ilk on construction sites previously, men who did not need to raise their voices to be heard. They bellowed because they relished the resonance. They ascended the porch steps in unison. The younger officer cleared his throat. "Mr. Hunt, that's me," I stated, "unless someone else has commenced consuming my morning coffee." He offered no mirth, no hint of a smile. He simply produced his notepad. "We have received numerous complaints from the Lakeview Estates HOA regarding a trail you have obstructed." The older officer interjected before I could respond. "You erected a sign without proper authorization." I inclined my head towards him. "Authorization. This is my land." He stepped onto my porch with an air of proprietorship. "Listen, buddy." "Buddy," I thought, "that's never a good sign. The trail behind your residence has been in use for over 2 decades. You cannot simply close it off on a whim. That's how communal access functions." Communal access does not supersede private property rights, I stated deliberately, not unless there's a recorded easement, which there is not. The younger officer shifted his weight, conveying a sense of agreement he was seemingly unable to articulate. The older officer folded his arms. We are not here for a property law lecture. Excellent, I replied, because I do not offer those services gratuitously. That remark clearly struck a nerve. I observed it in the subtle twitch of his jaw. He moved closer, lowering his voice as if intending to ensure the menace of his words penetrated deeply. Hear me very clearly, Hunt. If we receive even one more report of you harassing residents, I raised an eyebrow. I was merely advising them against discarding beer cans into the woodland. He disregarded my interruption. We have the authority to detain you for a 24-hour disorderly conduct hold. No charges are necessary. No inquiries will be made. He paused, allowing the implication to settle. That's when the disingenuousness became apparent. Not literal dirt, but political maturity. I met his gaze directly. May I inquire, officer, are you of sound mind? The younger officer stiffened, as if I had transgressed an unspoken boundary. However, the older officer, he smirked. A slow, unpleasant expression that revealed his anticipation of my misstep. Be cautious, he cautioned. Statements of that nature can be construed as obstruction for questioning his mental state. I felt a surge of indignation, not a fiery rage, but a heavy, sinking sensation that settled deep within my core. I maintained a steady tone. So, to clarify, a woman who possesses no ownership stake in my property contacts you, and that grants you the right to enter my domain and instruct me to grant access for her benefit? The younger officer finally spoke, his voice subdued and apologetic. Sir, we are merely here to encourage cooperation while this matter is being resolved. The older officer silenced him with a glance as sharp as a woodworking blade. Remove the sign by morning, he commanded, or we will escalate. Escalate, a convenient term people employ when they are unwilling to articulate the unvarnished truth. We will make your life exceedingly unpleasant. I leaned back against my porch pillar and crossed my arms. Do you gentlemen have your badge numbers? That question certainly captured their attention. The older officer's posture stiffened. Why? I inquired calmly. Because you are issuing me an unlawful directive, and I intend to file a formal report. For a fleeting moment, the younger officer appeared as though he wished to vanish into the ground. The older officer took a step backward. It was a minimal movement, but sufficient to indicate he had not anticipated resistance. I did not shout. I did not issue threats. I simply regarded them with the weary, unwavering patience of an individual who had been pushed just a fraction too far. Now, unless you gentlemen have procured a warrant or a court order, you are engaging in more trespass than anyone you are here to address. They did not apprehend me. They did not even attempt to do so. They retreated to their patrol vehicle. The older officer muttered something under his breath. The younger officer avoided eye contact. And as they departed, their tires stirring up dust down my driveway, one fact became undeniably clear. This was no longer a mere misunderstanding. This was a calculated exertion of pressure, subtle, underhanded pressure, and I had just called them out on it. After the police cruiser had departed my property, the kicked-up dust lingered in the air for longer than they deserved. I stood there for approximately 1 minute, hands on my hips, breathing deeply to suppress any impulsive utterances. A considerable time ago, when I was younger, more hot-tempered, and inclined to resort to physical confrontation rather than dialogue, an encounter such as that visit would have concluded unfavorably. However, maturity imparts lessons in timing and perseverance. And at that precise moment, standing on my own porch after being threatened with a 24-hour detention for allegedly harassing individuals trespassing on my land, I understood precisely what was required. Not anger, but substantiation. Thus I re-entered my home, retrieved my mobile device, and contacted the one individual I was confident would answer, even if he was in the midst of his Sunday religious service. Tom Peterson, my confidant, my legal counsel, and more significantly, a man who harbored an intense aversion to bullies, akin to a feline's disdain for vacuum cleaners. He answered on the second ring. "Are you in trouble again?" "Not yet," I replied, "but I suspect trouble is warming up the engine." I recounted the entire episode to him. The teenagers, the littering, the official notice, the police encounter, the older officer's menacing pronouncement, every detail. Tom listened without interruption, offering only low, contemplative grunts periodically, the kind of sounds emanating from someone who is already piecing together the narrative before the final sentence is uttered. Upon my conclusion, he exhaled slowly. "All right, Ron. First thing tomorrow morning, acquire surveillance equipment." "Cameras?" I inquired. "High-quality ones," he emphasized. "You need to monitor every square inch of that property. The kind that records, stores, timestamps, and synchronizes to the cloud. Do not economize. Individuals associated with the HOA, such as Karen, do not cease their actions unless a judicial order compels them to." I massaged my forehead. "You believe this will necessitate legal intervention?" "I suspect," he stated cautiously, "that they are counting on you lacking concrete evidence when they engage in reckless behavior." That assertion sent a shiver down my spine, more profoundly than Karen's threats or the officer's condescending tone, because Tom was never prone to hyperbole. He was not a man who embellished. If he sensed an impending issue, an issue was indeed imminent. "Install cameras," he reiterated. "Refrain from interacting with Karen. Do not engage with those officers. Maintain silence with everyone. Allow them to commit errors. Let the cameras capture their transgressions." I nodded, although he could not perceive the gesture. "Understood, Tom. Cameras it shall be." We concluded our conversation, and I remained seated at the kitchen table for a considerable duration. The dwelling was silent, excessively silent, and that quietude invariably prompts introspection. I did not desire animosity. I did not seek acrimony. I did not wish for this HOA spectacle to encroach upon my property. However, if they were intent on initiating conflict, I was certainly not about to engage unprepared. The subsequent morning, I drove into town and proceeded to the electronics section of the large retail establishment. A young employee, barely past adolescence, approached with an eager retail smile. "Looking for anything in particular, sir?" "Yes," I responded. "I require cameras, superior ones. The kind you would employ if you believed someone was on the verge of disrupting your life." He blinked twice. He did not pose any follow-up inquiries. An astute young man. We departed with 4 state-of-the-art outdoor cameras equipped with motion detection, night vision, sharp enough to discern a license plate at 2 in the morning, cloud storage, and sufficient cabling to secure a military installation. The expense exceeded several cases of beer, but peace of mind is an item that is never subject to discount. I dedicated the entire afternoon to their installation, one strategically placed on the pathway, another facing the main entrance, a third adjacent to the porch, and a fourth angled along the route leading towards the lake. Fastened securely, cables concealed, Wi-Fi connected, phone synchronized. By dusk, my property was illuminated on my screen like a nocturnal map. Every quadrant secured, every movement meticulously tracked. I opened a cold beverage and reviewed the live feed, the clarity of which was exceptional. Even the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze appeared as though it were captured in a nature documentary. I reclined, experiencing a sensation I had not felt since the inception of this entire predicament. Preparedness. Let Karen attempt something. Let her hired muscle try their hand. Let those constables return with their chests puffed out once more. This time, they would not only be incorrect, they would be demonstrably incorrect on camera. And that is the fundamental truth about individuals who abuse their authority. They can shout at you, they can condescend, they can push their luck, but they cannot dispute a time-stamped recording before a judge. Thus, I occupied my porch, observing the live camera feed on my mobile device, my property bathed in the cool, verdant glow of night vision, and I whispered to myself, "Very well, HOA, make your move." They did not disappoint. It transpired in less than 24 hours. The following morning commenced like any other. Coffee, the soft whisper of wind through the ancient oaks bordering my property. And then, shortly after 9 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Not a text message, not a call, but a motion alert from the rear trail camera. I tapped the screen, and the instant the video clip initiated, a chill permeated my veins. Two men, proceeding directly along my path as though on a leisurely Sunday promenade, clad in khaki trousers and matching polo shirts bearing a subtle Lakeview Estates HOA emblem. One of them sported a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. The other carried a crowbar, making no attempt to conceal it. They advanced directly towards my recently installed sign, the one I had reinforced with concrete and secured firmly. They paused, as if contemplating the most efficient method of dismantling a modest structure. The individual wielding the crowbar surveyed his surroundings briefly, then a smirk played on his lips. He then inserted the metal tip beneath the signpost. My jaw clenched. He applied his full body weight to the tool, emitting a grunt, and commenced to agitate the post back and forth. The other man maintained a watchful stance, arms folded, resembling a guard on a military assignment. And here's the crucial point. My cameras possess not only high resolution, but also audio recording capabilities. Clear, distinct audio. Consequently, when the man with the crowbar began to speak, I heard every single word. Crowbar guy. Karen instructed us to just break the darn thing. She's tired of looking at it. My eyebrows shot upwards. There it was, the statement every legal professional dreams of. Lookout guy. Yeah, well, this guy is going to lose his mind when he sees it gone. The crowbar scraped against the concrete. Crowbar guy. He isn't going to do anything. Karen runs the HOA. We run the trail. He emitted a laugh. A smug, unpleasant sound. Lookout guy. Man, he probably thinks that concrete is going to stop us. Another grunt. Another forceful tug on the crowbar. Then with a final exertion, the post snapped free. They casually removed the sign from its aperture and let it fall onto the dirt as if it were a trophy they held in contempt. The first individual expectorated on it. Crowbar guy. She'll be pleased we got it done before lunch. The audio not only captured their dialogue but also their evident pride, their audaciousness, their sheer folly, and most disturbingly, the conviction that they were utterly beyond reproach. I observed the entire spectacle unfold in real time from my porch, my hands clenched so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My initial impulse was to seize the truck keys, pursue them, and impart a lesson on the principles of private property delivered in the direct, uncomplicated manner I had learned growing up, often involving a firm grasp. But then Tom's voice resonated in my mind, calm and steady as always. Do not intervene. Allow them to make mistakes. Let the cameras do the work. Consequently, I remained stationary. I permitted them to depart with the crowbar, my sign, and their own profound foolishness. Subsequently, I saved the video footage, created 2 backups, uploaded it to the cloud, and dispatched a copy to Tom, accompanied by 2 succinct words. It transpired. He contacted me within 30 seconds. Ron, this is impeccable. They demolished the sign. More than that, he responded. They provided a narrative of the crime for us. He was unequivocally correct. Time-stamped, high-definition video, clear audio, and an explicit admission that Karen had ordered the destruction. Tom provided precise instructions for my next course of action. File immediately. Do not delay. Charges, property destruction, trespass, intimidation. Attach every second of that video evidence. Thus, I proceeded to the county courthouse, prepared the formal complaint, uploaded the video evidence to the clerk's digital system, and submitted all documentation as if I were depositing a live explosive device into the heart of the bureaucratic machinery. The clerk briefly scanned the document and then looked up at me with wide eyes. They did this while knowing they were being recorded? They are with the HOA, I explained. They operate under the assumption that cameras are for everyone else. She shook her head. Well, the judge is unlikely to appreciate this. Excellent, I replied. I do not require his approval, merely the truth. I departed the courthouse clutching a stamped copy of the complaint, a significant burden lifted from my shoulders. That evening I returned to my porch, observing the pathway through my phone's live camera feed. No movement stirred, only the gentle sway of the wind and the play of shadows. However, a palpable shift had occurred. This was no longer merely an exercise in frustration. This was a legal case, a legitimate one. And Karen was unaware of it yet, but she had just inadvertently engineered her own downfall with a crowbar. And tomorrow she would undoubtedly appear at my doorstep again, but this time she would not be alone. She would bring the same two officers, and she would bring considerable trouble with her. They did not delay in executing their subsequent maneuver. The very next day, shortly after midday, I was seated at my kitchen table, reviewing some older documents, when my phone vibrated once more. This time, the notification was not from the surveillance cameras. It was a text message from Tom. County has officially logged your complaint. The judge's clerk has flagged the video evidence. A promising start. Remain composed. A slight smile touched my lips at that last admonition. Remain composed, he advised, as if I were on the verge of storming outside, brandishing a garden tool. I slipped the phone into my pocket, walked to the sink to rinse my coffee mug, and that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of gravel, crunching slowly and deliberately, a disturbing echo of the previous day's déjà vu. I dried my hands, moved towards the front window, and peered through the blinds. The same county patrol car, the same unremarkable paint job, the same unsettling sensation in the pit of my stomach. And on this occasion, it was not merely the two officers present. Karen was accompanying them. She alighted from her SUV with an air of theatricality, as if making a grand entrance onto a stage she believed she owned. Her ponytail was pulled back tightly, sunglasses obscured her eyes, and a clipboard was clutched in her hand. For dramatic effect, I presumed. I observed them ascend my driveway in unison. Karen took the lead, followed by the older officer, with the younger one trailing behind, appearing to wish he were anywhere else. I drew a deep breath, activated my phone's camera application, and commenced recording. If they intended to engage in any foolish actions, they would be documented in high definition. By the time they reached my porch, I was already outside, leaning casually against one of the supporting pillars, my phone held at my side, positioned so the camera could capture their approach. The younger officer was the first to speak. "Mr. Hunt, Officer Myers, badge 614. "Mr. Hunt," I responded, my demeanor as placid as a quiet Sunday morning. "Back so soon?" The older officer's brow furrowed. "We are here to address an escalating situation." Karen did not wait for their pronouncements to conclude. She stepped forward assertively, as though she were their commanding officer. "This individual is unlawfully impeding communal access and intimidating residents," she stated briskly. "We informed you yesterday. He has refused to comply." I raised an eyebrow. "Curious," I remarked. "My recollection from yesterday is being threatened with a 24-hour confinement for standing on my own property." The older officer's jaw tensed. "Mr. Hunt, we are not going to revisit this discussion." "Precisely," I replied. "Let us address something new." I suddenly lifted my phone into view. "Before we proceed further, I require both of your names and badge numbers. You are issuing a directive on my property, and if that directive is deemed unlawful, I will need to formally document it." That statement seemed to alter the atmosphere. The younger officer exchanged a swift, apprehensive glance with the older one. The older officer's eyes narrowed. "Why are you recording us?" "Because the last time you were present," I stated, "you threatened to detain me for allegedly harassing individuals who were trespassing and littering. That sounded remarkably like an unauthorized exercise of authority. Therefore, I am now documenting the encounter." I gestured towards my phone. For your benefit and mine, he hesitated for a fraction of a second. The younger officer cleared his throat. "Officer Myers, badge 614. I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Officer Myers." I then turned my attention to the older officer. And yourself? He glared at me as if attempting to scorch a hole through my skull. Sergeant Dugan, badge 1732. I repeated it aloud, enunciating clearly so the audio capture would be precise. Sergeant Dugan, badge not 1732. I appreciate your cooperation. Karen scoffed dismissively. This is absurd. You are wasting their time and ours. Remove the sign and this entire matter will be resolved. I glanced past her towards the tree line where my sign had previously stood. Now, merely an empty space, still encircled by disturbed soil and chipped concrete. You mean the sign your HOA security personnel removed with a crowbar yesterday? I inquired. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. The younger officer blinked in surprise. You possess evidence of that? I nearly smiled. You tell me, I responded, holding up my phone. 4 cameras, complete coverage, clear video, clear audio. Your HOA operatives were heard bragging that Karen instructed them to break the darn thing. For the first time, Karen's composure faltered, revealing a hairline fracture in her confidence, but I observed it nonetheless. That statement has been taken out of context. I emitted a single laugh. That's the advantage of video footage, ma'am. There's very little context to manipulate when an individual is captured on camera, wielding a crowbar and mentioning your name as if you were the one authorizing their payment. Sergeant Dugan intervened, attempting to reassert some semblance of control. Mr. Hunt, regardless of what you believe you have recorded, we are here with a straightforward directive. Cease obstructing access to the trail until this matter is definitively resolved. That is all. I tilted my head. So I need to confirm this for the record, I stated. You're instructing me verbally to relinquish authority over property I legally possess without a court mandate, without any registered easement, and without any supporting paperwork. All of this stems from an HOA president's assertion that it's a public pathway. Is that an accurate summation, Sergeant? His mouth thinned into a tight, displeased line. You're distorting my words. No, I replied softly. I'm seeking clarity. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, tilting his hat back slightly, his gaze darting to my phone as if it were a dangerous weapon. Karen moved closer, her voice escalating. You can engage in wordplay all you wish, but this route is ours. You're merely a discontented elder who purchased property adjacent to the wrong community, and you're about to discover the consequences of that. I turned toward the recording device, my eyes fixed on her. Please note for the official account, I announced calmly. The Homeowners Association president is overtly attempting to dictate law enforcement actions on private land without any legal standing. That statement had a significant impact. Neither officer seemed pleased with that assertion. Sergeant Dugan uncrossed his arms, his tone growing sharper. All right, this discussion is concluded. You have been apprised of the situation. If you persist in creating further disturbances, this matter will be escalated through the proper channels. Excellent, I responded. Please do escalate it, as my next communication will be directed to the Sheriff's Department, and my attorney is already in possession of your names, your identification numbers, and a copy of this footage. The junior officer appeared as though he wished he could vanish into the patrol car. Karen made one final attempt, her voice a low hiss, audible only to us. You believe you've achieved a victory here? I shook my head. No, I said quietly. I believe I've simply ceased to be defeated. They departed without a handshake, without further remarks. Gravel crunched beneath tires as their vehicle pulled away. Karen's sports utility vehicle followed, like a persistent shadow unwilling to release its hold. I remained on the porch for a considerable duration after they had departed. The air was serene. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I didn't feel cornered. I felt like a man who had just illuminated a dark space. And somewhere beyond all the HOA documentation and the discourse about community access, I sensed that someone else had perceived that same illumination. They were gone. Karen, along with the 2 officers. Their receding dust lingered in the sunlight when my phone vibrated in my pocket. Initially, I assumed it was Tom following up, or perhaps a notification from the camera system, but no, it was an email. There was no sender's name, only an unfamiliar address. I nearly discarded it, assuming it was spam, but the subject line froze my scrolling finger. You are not mistaken. She fabricated everything. I opened the message, and within the very first sentence, the entire foundation of the conflict shifted beneath me. I witnessed the events at your residence today. Karen is losing her composure. She informed the board. You menaced her sons and assaulted law enforcement. Everyone here knows that is untrue. I blinked, rereading it twice to confirm I wasn't imagining it. An informant from within the HOA. The email continued. I am affiliated with the compliance division. I should not be communicating with you, but I can no longer tolerate this. Karen has been perpetrating document forgery for an extended period. She falsified the access easement she has been brandishing. She forged the signature of the prior owner, and last month she altered the date stamp on the trail map to give it an appearance of historical significance. She is a dangerous individual. My breath caught in my chest. There it was. The explanation for everything. The HOA correspondence. The police involvement. The overconfidence. The sheer arrogance. Karen wasn't bluffing. Her entire basis of influence was built upon fraudulent documentation, but the subsequent paragraph delivered an even greater impact. She became incensed after you recorded her interaction with the officers today. I overheard her state that she was finished with civility and intended to teach you a lesson. I am unwilling to remain present for whatever she has conceived next. Attached are the documents she wishes to keep concealed from all scrutiny. I scrolled down. 5 attachments were present. 1. A document labeled Trail Easement 98 with a misaligned stamp, a poorly rendered signature, and metadata indicating its creation last month. 2. A scanned page titled Community Access Charter PG7. The sole inconsistency. The HOA was established in 2008. 3. A photograph of Karen's desk revealing 3 distinct attempts at forging the same signature. 4. An email correspondence titled Let's Pressure Him on the Trail Issue, detailing her directive to board members to simply concur with her narrative. 5. A final audio clip, merely 6 seconds in duration. Karen's voice, unmistakably hers. I don't care what the law stipulates. That territory is now ours. We will compel his compliance. The words were chilling, sharp, and definitive. I let the phone slip into my lap. For a long, silent moment, I simply gazed out the window. I felt no anger, not even surprise, just a profound weariness. But it was a beneficial exhaustion, the kind that arises when truth finally reveals itself. I promptly forwarded all the information to Tom. No additional commentary, no explanation. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. He didn't offer a greeting. Ron, we're finished. Utterly concluded, he reiterated. She forged an easement. She falsified property records. She orchestrated law enforcement interference. She ordered the destruction of property. And thanks to your surveillance, we can directly attribute every action to her personally. I settled back into my chair. So, what transpires now? Tom inhaled deeply, the kind of satisfying breath a person takes when a legal triumph is already assured in their mind. I'll be submitting an injunction. I'll be submitting a criminal referral. Following that, I'll be initiating a civil lawsuit substantial enough to purchase you a brand new truck. I couldn't suppress a smile. You believe it will hold up? He let out a genuine laugh. Ron, magistrates do not disregard forged signatures, particularly when presented with 3 distinct examples of the same one. This is concluded. I terminated the call and stepped out onto my porch. The atmosphere felt transformed, lighter, as if the land itself could finally exhale. For weeks, possibly months, I had endured pressure, provocation, deception, threats, and had been treated as if I were an imbecile who would capitulate at the mere display of a badge or a clipboard. But today, the ground beneath my feet felt secure once more. Not because the conflict had ended. The legal proceedings were still forthcoming, but because truth had finally aligned itself with my cause. And truth, once it appears, does not depart. That evening I ventured down to the trail with a flashlight. The vacant space where my sign had once stood was still evident. The earth remained disturbed, and fragments of broken concrete were still scattered about. I bent down, retrieved a piece of that concrete, and turned it over in my hand. a stark reminder of their attempt to dispossess me. I placed it back down gently and whispered, "This is my land, and it always has been." Then I turned, walked back toward the house and secured the door, not out of apprehension, but as an ingrained habit, because deep down I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, Karen would awaken believing she still wielded power, but I had already divested her of it with a camera, an informant, and the truth she could not outrun. And that was the genuine conclusion.